On Christmas Day, my son locked the door, telling me that I was no longer a part of the family and that I should leave. I saw Bethany, his wife, giggling behind him, but instead of getting angry, I simply nodded, got into my car, and made a single phone call. Just 5 minutes later, all their guests rose from the dinner table and departed, leaving them alone in an empty house. It was a kind of betrayal that required a response, and I gave it to them by completely disrupting their celebration. I remember the words he had said to me earlier, the ones that had felt like a physical blow. "Why can't you be like Peter? He's a real man with real money." I had frozen in the living room doorway, watching Cody as he casually adjusted an expensive watch that probably cost more than my entire monthly pension. His designer jacket draped perfectly over his shoulders, seemingly tailored to fit his success. He exuded a kind of wealth I had never known. My voice came out much quieter than I intended, almost a whisper, as I asked him what he had just said. Cody rolled his eyes at me, a familiar gesture from his teenage years when I would ask him to clean his room, but now it was tinged with a cold adult cruelty. He calmly told me that I had heard him correctly. He explained that Peter Mills had built an empire. He then gestured dismissively at my humble home, pointing to my worn but clean couch where I had helped him with his homework for years. A rage began to boil inside me. I wanted to remind him that every single nail I had hammered had contributed to his college education. He just straightened his silk tie with a deliberate movement and claimed that the college education I paid for had not helped him much until he married Bethany. He insisted that Peter was the one who provided him with real opportunities and connections, and that I had only slowed him down with my worker mentality. My hands started to tremble as I clutched the door frame. I thought about the 40 years of double shifts, missed dinners, and back pain, all of which he now saw as a hindrance. He said he had made his own way in the world, and what did he have for it? A father who lived in a house that screamed construction worker to every visitor. Cody's laugh was sharp and cutting. He told me how embarrassed he was when Bethany's friends asked about his family, especially since Peter owned half of Denver's commercial district. He went on to ask what I owned besides power tools. Something inside me finally snapped. The calm I had maintained for 30-7 years as a father finally broke, and I firmly pointed to the front door, telling him to leave immediately. He scoffed, telling me not to play the role of the hurt father, because we both knew he had outgrown both the house and me. Cody took slow, deliberate steps toward the door, each one filled with open disdain. He suggested that maybe it was time for me to accept that some people were destined for bigger things. The door slammed behind him with such force that the family photos on the mantelpiece rattled. I was left standing in the sudden silence, trying to process what had just happened. The boy I had taught to ride a bike, the teenager I had driven to every baseball practice, had just declared that 40 years of my life meant nothing. From outside, I could hear a metallic scraping sound through the window, followed by footsteps on the gravel, as if something was being dragged across the concrete. Too emotionally drained to investigate, I collapsed into my favorite chair, the one with a small hole in the leather from a long-ago childhood adventure with scissors. I went through my evening routine like a ghost, hanging my work shirt in the closet with mechanical precision. My reflection in the bedroom mirror showed a man who had suddenly aged 70 years. With every movement, Cody's words echoed in my mind. A real man with real money. As I brushed my teeth, I was haunted by the memory of Cody when he was 8, proudly showing his friends the toolbox I had given him for Christmas and telling them with pure excitement, "My dad builds everything." I wondered when his pride had turned into shame. I thought back to the night I had worked until 3 in the morning on the Henderson project and then drove straight to his high school graduation, still in my coffee-stained work clothes with calloused hands. I remembered Cody hugging me afterward and whispering his thanks for always being there. And now, those same hands were being rejected as symbols of mediocrity. In order to pay for his college, I had worked 18-hour days for 3 years straight. I missed family dinners, sacrificed my weekends, and gave up vacations with friends, with every extra dollar going directly into his education fund. During those difficult years, I had told him that I wanted him to have the opportunities one never had. He seemed to understand and be grateful for my sacrifice back then, But everything changed the first time he visited Peter Mills's estate. I could still picture that fall evening when he returned from dinner with Bethany's family. His eyes burning with a hunger I had never seen before. He was in awe as he told me I should see Peter's house, describing it like something out of a magazine, with a wine cellar, marble floors, and paintings that were worth more than our entire neighborhood. Beneath his awe, I detected something darker: envy. That's when the comparisons started, subtle at first. He would mention how Peter believed investment portfolios were more reliable than pension plans. They became bolder later when he would suggest that he should have studied business instead of engineering. He would visit my modest home and look at it with new, critical eyes. Our phone calls grew shorter, and dinner invitations became rarer. His standard excuse became, "Sorry, I can't. Bethany's family is having an event." I tried to ignore the way his voice would change when he spoke of Peter, becoming reverent and enthusiastic in a way he used to be when he spoke about me. Last Christmas, he showed up an hour late with expensive gifts that felt more like obligations than tokens of affection. As he unwrapped the watch I had been saving to give him for months, he mentioned that Peter was teaching him about tax benefits. He explained that charitable contributions could be very strategic. It seemed that even my gifts were turning into lessons on his new way of thinking. I had watched my son transform from a boy who was proud of his working-class father to a man who was ashamed of his background. Each of his visits revealed new changes in him: designer clothes, a practiced way of discussing stock options, and casual mentions of exclusive clubs and business lunches. Our confrontation today was not a sudden burst of cruelty. It was the inevitable culmination of years of growing distance between us. Peter Mills hadn't just gained a son-in-law. He had taken my son. It was not out of malice, but simply because he existed in a world that made my sacrifices seem insignificant. Lying in bed, I stared up at the ceiling, trying to remember the last time Cody had asked about my day, my health, or my happiness. The silence stretched back for months, maybe even years. I wondered when I had become so unimportant to the boy around whom I had built my whole life. The house creaked around me, a familiar sound, the wood settling, the foundation shifting, the gentle protests of the home that had protected us through countless storms and holidays. This same house that Cody now saw as shameful had been his refuge throughout every crisis of his childhood. Sleep finally came around midnight, but even in my dreams, I could not escape the echoes of his words. I just wasn't one of the people who were meant for greater things. The morning light seeped through the bedroom curtains, harsh and unforgiving. My joints protested as I rolled out of bed, every movement a painful reminder of my 70 years. The digital clock showed 8:15 a.m. A bit later than I usually woke up, but yesterday's emotional beating had exhausted me more than any amount of physical work could have. I walked heavily to the bathroom, avoiding my reflection in the mirror. The coffee from the kitchen seemed to call out to me, promising the caffeine I would need to face another day in this new reality where my own son saw me as an embarrassment. My morning routine felt foreign after yesterday's shock. I pulled on a worn flannel shirt and work jeans, going through the motions of getting dressed as my mind replayed snippets of Cody's cruel words. The phrase, "worker mentality," felt like a thorn in my skin. The December snow had fallen overnight, blanketing my humble neighborhood in a pristine white that made everything appear cleaner than it was. The familiar routine of brewing coffee and fetching the morning paper from the porch usually grounded me, providing a sense of structure to the days that sometimes felt empty after I retired. But as I stepped outside into the crisp Colorado air, I immediately noticed something strange. My simple black metal mailbox, which I had put up 15 years ago, was now crooked on its post, with the door hanging open at an unnatural angle. I approached it slowly, my breath forming small clouds in the frosty air. The damage was clearly no accident. It looked like someone had deliberately and maliciously used a baseball bat or a crowbar to bend the metal. Fresh scratches marked its surface, and the pole was loose, causing the whole structure to tilt toward the street. Damned kids, I muttered to myself, but something about the precision of the damage didn't feel random. This wasn't a teenage prank. It felt personal and deliberate. The metallic scraping sound I had heard yesterday suddenly made perfect sense. I bent down to examine the base, my knees protesting the movement. I saw footprints in the snow around the mailbox, belonging to an adult with size 10 or 11 boots. The cold air seeped through my clothes as I tried to figure out what had happened after Cody had left. As I walked back to the house with the newspaper under my arm, an unfamiliar sense of unease crept up my spine. I had lived in this neighborhood for 40 years and had never been the target of vandalism. The timing seemed too coincidental to be random. Back in my warm kitchen, I poured coffee into my favorite cup and opened the newspaper on the table. The familiar comfort of my morning ritual should have calmed me, but I found my concentration slipping. The words on the page blurred as my mind returned to the damaged mailbox, to Cody's hurtful words, and to the growing suspicion that yesterday's confrontation was not over. I considered calling the police, but then I decided against it. What would I say? That my mailbox was vandalized the same night my son had called me a loser? They would just think I was a paranoid old man making up connections between unrelated events. The coffee grew cold as I stared at the headlines I couldn't comprehend. Sports scores, weather forecasts, local news. Nothing could penetrate the fog of unease that had settled over me. Something felt wrong, as if yesterday's argument was only the first part of a much bigger play. I attempted to focus on the crossword puzzle, a daily ritual that normally helped me escape from life's complications. The clue for 7 across was betrayal of a family member. I fully appreciated the irony, but I couldn't even muster a bitter laugh. The kitchen clock ticked steadily toward 9. Outside, my neighbors were beginning their morning routines. Garage doors opened, cars backed out of driveways, and the normal sounds of suburban life continued, even amidst my personal turmoil. Then the phone rang. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering, half expecting a wrong number or a telemarketer. The last voice I expected to hear was Cody's. "Dad, it's me," he said. His voice had an artificial sweetness that immediately put me on guard. It was a complete contrast to his brutal tone from yesterday. "Cody," I responded, keeping my voice neutral, unsure of where the conversation was heading. He told me he had been thinking about what happened all night and had completely overreacted. His words flowed too smoothly, too rehearsed. He said he had said things he didn't mean and was truly sorry. My grip on the phone tightened. After 40 years of being a parent, I knew when Cody was lying, and it seemed he had turned it into an art form. I told him that his feelings had seemed pretty clear at the time. He quickly denied it, saying he was just stressed about work, money, and everything else. He let out a hollow laugh and said I knew what Bethany's family could be like. Something cold settled in my stomach. The Cody from yesterday had been cruel but honest, but this version of him seemed dangerous in his deception. He continued, saying that was the real reason he was calling. He and Bethany wanted to invite me to Christmas dinner at their house the next night. He said it was nothing fancy, just Bethany's father, his successful and wealthy business partners, and some other relatives. The words Christmas dinner felt choked in my throat. He told me dinner was at 6 and that Bethany was making her famous roast. I should have said no. Every instinct was screaming danger, but a desperate part of me wanted to believe that my son felt genuine remorse. I said that I guessed I could come. "Fantastic," he said. Then he suggested I wear the nice suit from my wife's funeral, explaining that first impressions mattered to Peter's company. The line went silent for a moment, and I heard muffled voices. Cody's voice then became distant but audible, as if he had forgotten to hang up the phone. I heard him laugh sharply and cruelly. He said to someone that I had really believed him, and had they heard the pathetic hope in my voice? I heard Bethany's voice in the background, amused rather than disapproving. I heard her admit that the whole thing would be interesting. She said Peter would love it, his successful business pitted against my construction worker father. She believed the contrast would be perfect. "Don't forget the legacy," Bethany added, explaining that her father needed to see how much better he was than me. She said that this dinner was what would guarantee them her father's inheritance and business. "Right," I heard Cody say. By the end of the evening, he would look pathetic next to Peter's company. Peter would see how much they loved him and no one else but him. My hand was shaking so much that I nearly dropped the phone. The sheer complexity and cruelty of their plan hit me like a physical blow. I realized this wasn't about reconciliation. It was about using me as a prop to manipulate Peter Mills. I carefully hung up the phone, my whole body trembling. They had planned this, not just a dinner, but a performance of emotional manipulation, a fake apology, and a deliberate preparation for public humiliation. My son had not only rejected me, he had chosen to turn me into a weapon. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in as the full extent of their betrayal settled over me. This wasn't teenage rebellion or adult disappointment. This was calculated cruelty designed to strip me of any dignity I had left. I sat down heavily in my chair, the newspaper crumbling to the floor. For several minutes, I couldn't move or think of anything but the echo of their laughter and the indifferent way they discussed my humiliation. Slowly, however, something else began to grow inside my chest. It wasn't the feeling of defeat I had experienced yesterday, but something firmer and more focused. If they wanted to play games with my emotions, if they thought they could use me as entertainment for their schemes, they were about to discover that this old builder still had a few tricks up his sleeve. The phone was silent, but my mind was already racing. My hands were still shaking. Father, the builder. The words repeated in my mind like a broken record. Not my father or dad. Just the title of my profession, the social class that they seemed to find so confusing. I gripped the arm of my chair until my knuckles turned white, fighting the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm me. Bethany's giggle replayed in my head, a sharp sound like breaking glass from a young woman who took pleasure in planning an old man's humiliation. She had said, "This is going to be interesting," as if my dignity were a dinner theater for their entertainment. But it was Cody's voice that hurt the most, full of pathetic hope. He had recognized the desperation in my tone when I accepted the invitation, and he had relished it. My own son had turned my love for him into a weapon, using my willingness to forgive as ammunition for their scheme. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling beneath me. 70 years of life, 45 years of marriage, and 37 years of parenthood had all been reduced to mere props in their grand scheme to impress Peter Mills. They weren't just rejecting me. They were planning to make a circus out of my working-class background. A photo on the refrigerator caught my eye, a picture of Cody's high school graduation. I saw a photo of us smiling together by his diploma. I had worked 18-hour days to pay for that private school, and now he wanted to use my hard work as evidence of his own greatness. Something fundamental changed in my chest. It wasn't the crippling sadness I had felt yesterday, but something more solid and focused. My dad had always taught me that a person's value isn't measured by their bank account, but by how they get back on their feet after being knocked down. I remembered him saying that after the neighborhood bullies had cornered me when I was a boy, I could lie there and take it, or I could get up and show them who I really was. I went to the living room window and looked out at my damaged mailbox. The vandalism suddenly made perfect sense. It was a form of psychological warfare, designed to make me feel vulnerable and more likely to accept their dinner invitation. They had carefully orchestrated every detail, from the property damage to the fake apology, all building up to the grand finale the next night. But they had made one critical error. They assumed I would never discover their plan. I moved to the desk drawer where I kept important phone numbers. A year ago at Cody's birthday party, Peter Mills had given me his business card as a gesture of respect between in-laws. He had told me to call him anytime and that we should get to know each other better. I had appreciated his directness and his lack of pretense despite his obvious wealth. Now, that business card represented something completely different. An opportunity. My engineering mind began to analyze the situation with mechanical precision. They wanted to humiliate me in front of Peter to prove their superiority and secure his inheritance. But what if he found out about their deception in advance? What would he think if he learned that his daughter and son-in-law were manipulating him and being cruel to an elderly family member? Peter Mills didn't build his business empire by tolerating dishonesty. From our brief conversations, I knew he was a man who valued integrity more than social climbing. He would not appreciate being used as an unknowing participant in such a psychological scheme. The phone number on the card seemed to pulse with possibilities as I held it. One conversation could change everything. It wasn't about revenge, but about justice, making sure that such manipulative schemes had appropriate consequences. Peter Mills would not have built his business empire by tolerating dishonesty. From our brief conversations, I recognized a man who valued integrity over social careerism. He would not have appreciated being used as an unwitting participant in psychological abuse. I checked the kitchen clock. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. Peter would already be in the office, likely reviewing contracts or planning business strategy. It seemed like a good time to call a fellow businessman, even a retired one. For the first time since Cody left yesterday, I felt something other than pain and confusion. I felt a sense of purpose and direction, a confidence that I would not be a victim of anyone, not even my own son. Finding Peter's business card took longer than I had expected. I had carefully filed it in my desk organizer, sandwiched between insurance documents and warranty information, a precise organizational method that had served me well for decades of engineering projects. My hands stopped shaking, now replaced by the steady concentration I used to bring to reviewing blueprints and construction schedules. The card felt substantial between my fingers, expensive cardboard that spoke of success earned, not inherited. It had his company name, Mills Commercial Development, and his title, Peter Mills, Director. Below that were his direct office number and his cell phone number, which showed me that he was a man who didn't hide behind secretaries or assistants. I sat in my reading chair, which had a clear view of both the front window and the kitchen clock, and picked up the phone. My strategy required careful timing. I knew that accuracy was more important than speed. What exactly was I going to say to him? The truth, of course, but it had to be delivered with surgical precision. Peter needed to know that his daughter and son-in-law were manipulating him, using family gatherings as stages for their auditions for his inheritance. But I couldn't sound like a bitter old man complaining about his ungrateful children. I silently practiced my opening lines. I needed an approach that balanced urgency with respect and honesty with diplomacy. The facts were simple. I had accidentally overheard a conversation that revealed their true intentions for the dinner the next night. They planned to humiliate me in front of him to demonstrate their superiority and improve their chances of getting his inheritance. They had even vandalized my property to make me feel psychologically vulnerable. I needed him to trust me, which meant I had to acknowledge my own emotional involvement while maintaining my objectivity. Peter, I know this puts you in an awkward position, but I thought you deserved to know what they're planning. My plan was to appeal to his sense of fairness rather than ask him to take sides. One potential complication troubled me. What if Bethany was with him? I knew that father-daughter breakfasts were not uncommon in family businesses. I had to be prepared to offer to call back later if the time wasn't right for a private conversation, but my gut told me that this was the perfect moment. Waiting would only give me more time to doubt myself and lose the clarity that came from my righteous anger and recent betrayal. Peter Mills seemed like someone who valued straightforwardness, who would rather deal with problems head-on than let them fester. I returned to the phone, card in hand, and took a deep breath. This conversation would determine whether the next night would be their triumph or their downfall, whether justice would win out over manipulation, and whether the old builder could outsmart the privileged children who had underestimated him. The numbers felt familiar under my fingertips as I dialed. It was a professional muscle memory from decades of making important phone calls for contract negotiations and emergency consultations. Each number was deliberate, purposeful, and irreversible. The phone rang twice before Peter answered with his familiar, professional yet warm voice. I explained everything to him, not truly expecting him to believe me, but my words visibly shocked him, and he didn't try to hide his anger and confusion. After I shared my plan, he readily agreed to help me. The next evening, I drove through the affluent Hillcrest neighborhood in Denver, and it all felt surreal. Mercedes and BMWs lined the curved streets like expensive jewels displayed on velvet. Christmas lights twinkled from mansions that could house 3 families my size, each a testament to a kind of wealth I could never have imagined. Cody's house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, its limestone facade illuminated by strategically placed spotlights. Peter's black Bentley dominated the circular driveway, surrounded by other luxury cars that probably cost more than my annual pension. The scene looked like a magazine spread about how the other half lives. I parked my modest Honda next to a shiny Porsche, the contrast almost comical. Through the massive front windows, I could see silhouettes moving around the elegant dining room. I assumed they were Peter's business associates, spectators for tonight's planned humiliation. Checking my appearance in the rearview mirror, I smoothed my tie and adjusted my jacket. The same dark blue suit I wore to my wife's funeral looked decent enough, though it would seem worn out next to the designer clothes inside. That was exactly what Cody and Bethany were counting on. But as I walked along the immaculate stone path, my steps were confident and my breathing was calm. Let them have their moment of triumph. Justice had a way of coming when it was least expected. Before I could ring the bell, the front door opened with dramatic precision. Cody stood in the golden light pouring from inside, his expensive suit immaculate, and his expression filled with the cruel satisfaction I had heard in his voice yesterday morning. He spoke loudly enough for the guests inside to hear, asking me if I really thought I belonged there. Behind him, Bethany appeared like a supporting actress on cue. Her black cocktail dress probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and her smile had the sharp edge of anticipated amusement. She said that this was precious and that I had actually come. Cody stepped forward, completely blocking the entrance, his body language communicating possession and control. He then raised his voice with practiced cruelty to ensure maximum impact for his audience inside. He told me that I was no longer a part of their family and that only Bethany's parents were their family now. He then told me to go away. His words hit the cold air like physical blows, designed to wound and humiliate. I could see the guests inside stopping their conversations, some turning toward the commotion with that awkward fascination people reserve for public embarrassments. Bethany's laughter bubbled up from behind Cody, excited and malicious. She said I was even better than they had imagined. But instead of the broken ruin they expected, I felt only a strange sense of completion. It was exactly what I had prepared for, exactly what Peter needed to confirm through his sources inside. My voice remained steady, disappointingly calm for their theatrical performance. "Well, Cody," I said, "I hope you get everything you deserve today." I met his eyes with the quiet dignity of a man who had worked honestly his entire life. Everything. His expression flickered with a momentary confusion. This was not the script he had written. He had expected pleading, shame, and public humiliation to prove his superiority to Peter's influential friends. "That's right, old man," he said. "Go back to your little builder's house where you belong." But there was less conviction in his voice now, unsettled by my unexpected calm. I turned and walked back to the car with measured steps, my back straight despite the December cold. Behind me, I heard Cody's forced laughter and Bethany's comments, but their words seemed distant and unimportant. When I got to my Honda, I settled into the driver's seat and watched the house through the windshield. Through those expensive windows, Peter's guests continued their elegant evening, unaware that they were about to witness a very different kind of show. I took out my phone and dialed Peter's number. It rang twice before he answered. I simply said, "Joseph," as we discussed, while watching the golden windows of the house where my son thought he had just achieved his greatest victory. "I understand completely," Peter said. His tone carried the weight of a man who had built an empire, quickly reading situations and acting decisively. "Thank you for keeping me informed." The call ended there. There were no dramatic statements or long explanations, just two men who understood that some betrayals demanded immediate consequences. I watched him raise his glass of wine, drawing attention. The room gradually fell silent as Denver's business elite turned to their host, expecting pleasant Christmas cheer or perhaps a toast. "Friends," Peter's voice carried the authority that had brought him millions. "On this Christmas Eve, I want to talk about family values, real values that are more important than social status or financial success." Cody and Bethany beamed, interpreting this as validation of their actions, proof that Peter appreciated their demonstration of superiority over my working-class background. "I've learned today about people who value money over character, who manipulate family relationships for personal gain," Peter said. His tone was conversational, but his words were surgically precise. People who treat older family members as props in their schemes of social careerism. The first shadow of confusion crossed Cody's face. This was not the praise he had expected. I also learned the difference between inherited wealth and earned dignity, Peter continued, between people who build themselves up by tearing others down, and those who maintain their integrity regardless of their bank balance. Bethany's smile began to fade as the guests exchanged glances. Peter's meaning was now unmistakably clear. So today, I choose to spend my Christmas with people who understand that family loyalty and basic human decency are more important than manipulative and greedy children. Peter sat down his wine glass with finality. I choose to leave this house and this company. The silence that followed was deafening. Peter then walked to the front door with calm determination, his decision made and executed with the same business efficiency that had built his empire. Peter, wait! Cody's voice cracked with despair. But Peter didn't stop. Daddy, you don't understand, Bethany began. But her father was already reaching for his coat. None of the guests needed any further explanation. In Denver's social hierarchy, following Peter Mills was simply common sense. One by one, the guests began to gather their belongings, muttering polite excuses that fooled no one. "This is a misunderstanding," Cody exclaimed, his voice rising to a panic. "We can explain everything." But explanations were unnecessary. The exodus began, and within minutes, the elegant dinner party disintegrated into an awkward scramble for the exits. Peter was the first to leave the house, his dignified stride cutting through the December air to my modest Honda. Behind him followed 3 other guests, successful people who had just witnessed something extraordinary. "Joseph." Peter's voice carried genuine warmth as he approached my car. "I believe we have a better place to spend Christmas Eve." "Indeed," I said, unlocking the door and inviting them inside. "Follow me, gentlemen. It's not far." The convoy formed naturally. My aging Honda led the parade of luxury cars through the night streets of Denver. In the rearview mirror, I watched as Bentleys and Mercedes followed my modest car like a funeral procession, though it felt more like a celebration. "I have to ask," Peter said from the passenger seat, his voice still tinged with shock. "How did you know to prepare for today? How did you foresee all this?" I drove through the traffic light, choosing my words carefully. "I've been watching Cody change for months, and after I overheard their conversation yesterday morning, I called you right away." One of the guests, a close friend of Peter's, leaned forward. "Did you really prepare an alternative dinner? A full Christmas feast?" I confirmed, feeling a quiet satisfaction. I had prepared it today because it seemed wise to have a backup plan. Peter nodded admiringly. Most people would either have avoided the confrontation altogether or gone into it unprepared. You did neither. I simply replied that 40 years in construction teaches you to plan for all eventualities, and to always have a backup plan when you're dealing with unreliable people. The irony was not lost on me, calling my own son unreliable. We returned to my neighborhood, where the modest houses contrasted sharply with the affluent area we had just left. Christmas lights twinkled from small front yards, creating a warm, authentic atmosphere that money couldn't buy. "That's what I was trying to tell them in my toast," Peter continued, looking at the working-class houses. "Real wealth isn't about bank accounts or designer clothes. It's about character, loyalty, who you are when no one is looking. You gave them exactly what they deserved." Other cars parked along my street, expensive cars that looked strangely out of place in this honest neighborhood. All the guests got out of their cars, not with contempt, but with genuine curiosity about this man who had outsmarted the manipulators. "I have to mention," Peter said as we walked to my front door, "I'm ending all business relations with Cody immediately. And Bethany?" He paused, pain flashing across his features. "She'll inherit much less than she expected." "I'm sorry about that, Peter. I never meant to cause trouble between you and your daughter." "You didn't cause anything, Joseph. You revealed what was already there." He stopped at my front steps, looking back at the cars lined up behind us. "These people," he pointed to all the people surrounding us, They respect what you did today. So do I. Mrs. Henderson from the house next door peered through her curtains at the unusual collection of luxury cars, probably wondering if I had won the lottery or joined some exclusive club. In a sense, I suppose I had a club of people who value honesty over inheritance. "Welcome to my home," I said, taking out my house keys. Warm light poured through the windows onto the front porch, and I could see my dining table set for the exact number of people now standing behind me. The evening was far from over. Opening my front door felt like unveiling a masterpiece. Warm light poured out of my modest living room, revealing the Christmas tree I had decorated with ornaments collected over decades of marriage and parenthood. The dining table, visible through the archway, was set for 8, with my wife's finest china. Beautiful tableware I had almost forgotten about. "My God, Joseph!" Peter entered first, his gaze taking in every detail. "Did you really prepare all this?" "I started cooking at noon," I replied, helping the guests with their coats. It seemed like the right thing to do. The house smelled of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and apple pie, aromas that spoke of a real holiday, not a social performance. In my kitchen, the dishes were waiting on the counter, everything perfectly timed and ready to serve. All the guests moved through my house with respectful admiration, looking at family photos and admiring the authentic Christmas decorations. They were successful people, Peter's relatives and partners, accustomed to luxury, but they seemed more comfortable here than at Cody's expensive exhibition. "It feels like Christmas," one of them commented, settling into my favorite chair. "Real Christmas, not some magazine spread." I began bringing dishes from the kitchen. Golden turkey carved and arranged on plates, mashed potatoes with real butter, green beans from my own garden that I had frozen last summer. Peter immediately joined me, carrying salad bowls without being asked, our partnership naturally extending to domestic cooperation. "When was the last time you saw me serve dinner to myself?" he asked quietly, pouring water into glasses around the table. "I usually have people to do that for me. Today we're all just family and friends sharing a meal," I replied, setting out the last of the place settings. The transformation was striking. Peter Mills, who owned half of Denver's commercial district, was helping an elderly builder serve dinner, and it felt completely natural. His partners, accustomed to 5-star restaurants and catered events, praised my simple cuisine with genuine enthusiasm. "This turkey is incredible, Joseph," said one of them, cutting into the perfectly brown bird. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" 45 years of marriage," I replied, pouring wine from bottles I had saved for special occasions. "My wife taught me well before she passed away." The conversation flowed around shared stories of family traditions, honest work, and values that truly mattered in life. These wealthy businessmen found themselves relaxing, laughing, and sharing memories of their own humble beginnings and the people who shaped their character. Peter raised his glass when the main course was over. "Joseph, I want to thank you for today, not only for revealing the truth, but for reminding us what true hospitality looks like and what a real family means," added another guest. "Family isn't about blood or money. It's about the people who support you when it matters." I slowly stood up, feeling the weight of the moment. Everyone fell silent, sensing that something important was about to happen. The warm light from my Christmas tree cast gentle shadows on the faces that had become allies, even friends, in the space of a single evening. Headlights appeared through the front window. 2 cars stopped behind the others, their engines dying with the abrupt finality of desperate decisions. I raised my glass, looking around the table at faces glowing with genuine warmth and satisfaction. "To family," I began, raising my glass to the warm faces surrounding my dinner table. "Not the family we were born into, but the one we choose, the people who support us when it matters, who value character over." The front door burst open without warning. Cody stormed through my living room like an invading army, Bethany close behind him, both still in their expensive party clothes, but now disheveled with despair. "How dare you?" Cody's voice cracked with rage as he took in the scene. Peter and the guests were comfortably seated around my modest table. Wine glasses were raised, and faces were glowing with genuine warmth. How dare you steal our guests? The reaction around my table was immediate and uncomfortable. Guests put down their glasses, shifted in their chairs, witnessing this display of privileged rage. Peter's face darkened with shame for his daughter, who stood next to Cody with tears of disappointment streaming down her cheeks. I didn't steal anyone, I replied calmly, still holding my glass. I just offered them a place where they would be welcomed as guests, not used as props. You manipulated them, Bethany squealed, pointing an accusing finger at me. You turned them against us with your sob stories and your poor old man act. One of Peter's partners cleared his throat diplomatically. Actually, we left because of the toast your father gave about family values. It was quite instructive. Cody turned to the guests, his despair palpable. He's lying to you. He's just a bitter old builder who can't accept that his son has surpassed him. He sabotaged our dinner because he's jealous of our success. Success? Peter's voice cut through the room like a knife. Is that what you call planning to humiliate your father to impress me and the guests? Bethany rushed to her father, kneeling beside his chair. Daddy, please. You don't understand. We were trying to show you how much we love you. By using Joseph as a target for ridicule, Peter's voice carried the coldness of utter disappointment. By planning his public humiliation as entertainment. It wasn't like that, Cody insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. We just wanted to show the contrast between. The room fell silent, except for Bethany's muffled sobs. Around the table, faces showed a mixture of sympathy for my situation and disgust at the young couple's behavior. These were successful people who understood the value of character, and they had just witnessed its complete absence. Cody's face was red with rage and despair. He turned to me and said, You ruined everything. Do you have any idea what this cost us? Peter's legacy was our future. Your future was never built on solid ground, Peter said, slowly rising from his chair. The authority in his movement instantly caught the attention of everyone in the room. It was built on manipulation, greed, and the assumption that I would never discover your true character. Bethany looked at her father with pleading eyes. Daddy, please no. Peter's voice carried a finality that drowned out all protests. Peter stood with the commanding presence that had built a business empire. His gaze shifted between his daughter and son-in-law with the cold assessment of a man who had just discovered termites in his foundation. Bethany, Cody, he began, his voice echoing through my dining room with devastating clarity. Today you have revealed yourselves to be the very people I have avoided my entire business life. Manipulative, greedy, and fundamentally dishonest. Dad, you can't. Bethany began, but Peter raised his hand to silence her. I can and I will. Effective immediately, Cody is dismissed from all business relations with Mills Commercial Development. Your job, your access to company resources, your future participation in any Mills family ventures, it's over. Cody's face turned white. Peter, please, I can explain. Furthermore, Peter continued, his business-like precision cutting through every interruption. My will is being rewritten next week. Bethany, your inheritance is reduced to exactly what Cody brought into this marriage. Nothing. The bulk of my estate will go to charities that truly understand the value of helping others without expecting anything in return. You can't do that, Bethany cried, jumping to her feet. I'm your daughter. Yes, you are my daughter. And today you showed me what kind of daughter you have chosen to be. Peter's voice carried a deep sadness beneath its firmness. Someone who would humiliate an elderly person for personal gain. Someone who values money over basic human decency. Around the table, Peter's partners nodded in agreement. These were people who had achieved success through character as much as ambition, and they recognized justice when they saw it. Cody made one last desperate attempt. It's all his fault. He pointed at me with trembling hands. He turned you against us. He poisoned your mind with lies. Joseph told me the truth, Peter replied simply. Something you two seem incapable of doing. I slowly stood up, feeling the weight of justification, but also the responsibility it carried. Cody, I'm sorry it came to this. I really am. But you chose this path when you decided that my love for you was something to be exploited, not cherished. Keep your fake sympathy, Cody hissed, but his voice was breaking. You ruined our lives. No, I said quietly. You did that yourselves. I just made sure that the consequences finally caught up with your choices. Bethany grabbed Cody's arm, pulling him toward the door. Let's go. We don't need them. We don't need any of them. But even as she spoke, reality set in. Without Peter's business, without his inheritance, without the connections they had just pushed away, they had very little left except each other and the consequences of their actions. They left without a word, the front door closing behind them with the finality of the end of a chapter. The silence that followed felt different from the awkward tension of their presence. It was the silence of justice done, of order restored. Peter sat back heavily, suddenly looking his 65 years. Joseph, I owe you a deep apology, not only for their behavior, but for not seeing it sooner. No apology necessary, I replied, settling back into my chair. Sometimes we see what we hope to see in the people we love. One of the guests raised his glass again to true family values and to the people who live by them instead of just talking about them. And to second chances, added Peter, looking around the table with genuine enthusiasm. Sometimes the family we need is not the one we were born into, but the one we are lucky enough to find. I raised my glass one last time, looking at the faces that had become friends through the crucible of this strange evening. For Christmas Eve, I said simply, and for reminding me that character, not wealth, makes life rich. Outside, snow began to fall on the quiet neighborhood, covering the footprints of those who had left and blessing those who had decided to stay. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.